Section 217 of the Nigerian Constitution stated that there shall be an armed forces of the Federation which shall consist of an army, a navy, an air force, and such other branches of the armed forces of the Federation as may be established by an act of the National Assembly. In Africa, Nigeria is ranked the fourth strongest military power, the fourth after Egypt, Algeria, and South Africa. In these three aforementioned countries, there is nothing like insecurity or any form of, instability. But why in Nigeria? I've been talking about insecurity for quite a couple of times. One of the Nigerian presidents was said, so he said something, he said, if there is any kind of, instability in a country, be it a riot, be it looting, be it, kidnapping, ritualism, banditry, terrorism, in any country, definitely a strong politician is behind it. Olusola Ayobami is my name. I will be your host. I will be your anchorman for today. I welcome you to MFM TV, where we set the agenda and project the truth. This is MFM TV, situated in the premises of DSC's Hotel, Akpete in Ibadan. It's going to be colorful more than before. You too, you can do well to join us on our Facebook page at AIM FM TV. Don't forget to like, to share, and to drop your comment at the same time. Why not telling someone, let's get together, let's sit together? I will sincerely appreciate your contribution today. Even though if you want to call in, the studio line is open at 081-5919-4247. Is the studio line 081-5919-4247. What is happening in Nigeria as far as insecurity is concerned? Some people have been calling for secession, saying let's part ways. If glowing together will never make us successful as a nation. I remember on one of my shows, maybe this week or last week, I said it here, I said, the way we were brought together as a nation, we need to address it. And I've said it on one of my shows here. How did we come by the name Nigeria? Is there or has there ever been an agreement between the Southern Protectorate as well as the Northern Protectorate saying, okay, we want to, live together as a family, as one? Or the British, they forced us to live together? Because before 1914, there was nothing like Nigeria. We don't have a country called Nigeria before 1914. But people have been in this southern and the northern protectorate before that 1914, trading, living together. I made us to understand one fact sometimes ago that before 1914 we've had King Jaja of Okobo and many others we've had kings in Benin City. But what happened? By 1914, we were being merged together to live as a country. And then never since then, power, they've been rotating power as far as who is going to be the #1 citizen in this country called Nigeria. Many did not know that different names were suggested before the name Nigeria. As we know that some people will be asking that why do we have Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, Guinea-Conakry, and then is it New Papua Guinea? Yes. But these ones, they have their own reasons for having such names. And we've had a country in Nigeria, in Africa, I beg your pardon, that wasn't colonized at all. When we talk about the almighty Ethiopia, Ethiopia was not, it was never colonized by anybody. But we've had it in Nigeria. The Portuguese, they've been here. The Spanish have been here before the British. On that day, we talked about how someone sold the whole of Nigeria. Well, but it's not funny if we can call ourselves the giant of Africa. If Nigeria is truly a giant of Africa, giant in what aspect? Economically, in Africa, we could refer ourselves as the giant of Africa. Giant in what aspect? Aside that, find Nigeria as the best, those talents. Was it not about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when we had, it's a burning issue, where we had this issue saying, why do you like being in Nigeria? I will talk about talent. If you want the best in this, best in that, best here, best there, they will tell you, oh, name it, making robots, doctors, engineers, as the case may be. Even though in the entertainment industry, Nigeria, we are doing great. But my concern is this. Before, Nigeria Food Army was regarded as the best in the world, even though the US, they confirmed it, saying when it comes to Food Army, I think that was during the regime of Olusola Ayobami. They confirmed it that when it comes to Food Army, wow, kudos to Nigeria Army. But what went wrong? And then let's take it from there. During the regime of Obasanjo, what is the insecurity rate in Nigeria? We had none. During the regime of Yaradua, we had the likes of militants, Niger Delta's militants, and then it was able to negotiate together with them, to put an end to all those things. When Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, when he took over as the president of Nigeria, when Goodluck Jonathan took over as the president of Nigeria, we had the likes of Chibok girls being kidnapped, Boko Haram insurgents, and many others like that. ex-president Muhammadu Buhari took over, he promised to end Boko Haram in 3 months. But even though it was at minimal level, but what I'm trying to say is don't forget what I said earlier at the beginning of this show. I said, someone once said that if there is any form of insurgency, kidnapping, terrorism, banditry in a country, definitely there is one or there are some big wings in politics that knows about it. Muhammadu Buhari could not end insurgency, but one of these soldiers he said something, in fact, he confronted Bukar Turatai then saying, why are you sending us to the war front so that we can lose our lives? One of those soldiers he said that the weapons given to us cannot match those ones given to, the terrorists possess. We can't forget, during the administration of Goodluck Jonathan, Sambo Dasuki, the Minister of Defense, huge, lucrative, bulky, and then meaty amount of money he looted. When he was arraigned, he started mentioning names, saying, no, I wasn't the only one who took this money. This minister collected his share. That one collected his share. And gradually, Nigeria started losing her glory as the best foot soldier in the world. And we are here today. On the daily newspapers, we usually have it that insecurity is now epidemic in Nigeria. Nigeria, that before is safe for you and I. What do we have in Nigeria of today? God bless Nigeria. We've said it millions and thousands of times, and yet we couldn't see any effect of God blessing Nigeria. Why? I said it during my show yesterday that if God wants to bless you, God will not come down, but people around you will assist you. Let's compare Nigeria, when it comes to war, the armed forces, the military power, we talk about the Russians, the Americans. We can't forget, even the Chinese. They are doing fantastic well. Looking at the physique of most of our soldiers sometimes, it's questionable. You wonder, are you sure this one is a soldier? Are you sure this one can go to the battlefield? What shall we say? I highlighted some issues that we can suggest that is causing insecurity in Nigeria. And then I might eventually take it down to the Amotekun. When the Amotekun was inaugurated, saying to combat terrorism and kidnapping in the southwestern part of Nigeria, I said it's not all about forming them. How best are we taking care of them? Well, I will show us a video now, and then maybe from there we take it when we come back. Let's compare. I want you to watch. What does it mean to be in the U.S. military compared to that of Nigerian military? But this one centers much on the U.S. military. I'm sure you've been to Iraq, you've seen Nigerian army, operating. So let's watch. But most of us have not been to U.S. Let's watch how these U.S. armies, how they have been doing fantastic work.
The nation has nearly no capabilities to deploy abroad. In fact, its constitution doesn't even have a mechanism to declare war. Some militaries build on their defensive capabilities with limited expeditionary posturing, ability to wage a small-scale operation abroad. This requires an expensive mix of training, equipment, and planning. Whereas domestic capabilities can be permanent and stationary, all expeditionary capabilities inherently must be designed to be temporary and mobile. This spans from the ability to fire a missile to the ability to cook up breakfast, which raises cost and complexity dramatically. For this reason, large-scale expeditionary capabilities are largely confined to the largest, best-funded militaries like those of France, Mexico, or Canada. But then there's the US military. It is in a class of its own. Whereas most nations can defend at home and some can deploy abroad, the US military has a rather singular strategic posture. They have essentially turned the entire world into home turf. Their goal is complete. It's the ability to fight any sort of fight in any location at any moment. To an American, that might sound like the inherent function of a military, but it's a uniquely US approach. Most militaries are merely designed to respond to relevant regional threats and can scale up to wage a war abroad if necessary. To be able to fulfill this all-encompassing mission, the US military has a degree of flexibility and globality unmatched by any other, which incurs a near endless array of exceptional costs for the force. They pay to produce their own private label of chicken tenderloins and ship it all around the world to places like this base in southeastern Turkey because they run a grocery store there, because they have thousands of service members stationed there, because that's where they keep about 50 nuclear warheads in case they decide to use one in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, or elsewhere. They pay for professional sports teams to incorporate patriotic ceremonies honoring past and present service members into their games in order to help boost recruiting to the level needed to staff all their roles worldwide. They pay to develop an occasionally viral bipedal humanoid robot because they believe that in the future they can gain a competitive advantage against other forces by having these robots integrate into their ranks and fulfill the most dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks. These costs grow and grow atop each other, then span all around the world. From a spatial and logistical standpoint, covering the globe is nothing less than a monumentally challenging and expensive task. Then there's the temporal component. Making sure that the right soldiers with the right weapons and technology are in the right locations requires a predictive approach and proactive planning. And predicting what future warfare looks like, then preparing for it, is also an extremely expensive endeavor. Take, for example, the USS Freedom, a first-of-its-kind littoral combat ship commissioned in 2008. At just under 400 feet or 120 meters long, what this ship lacks in size, it more than makes up for in design complexity and state-of-the-art technology. This ship represents 2 entire decades of planning and predicting, researching and developing, contracting and commissioning. A nearly inconceivable dedication of time and resources, but one that begins to make sense when considering the expectations. When conceived of in the 1990s, the littoral combat ship was meant to lead the American Navy for the next half-century. With the Cold War coming to a close, the US Navy had found itself over-indexed in warships designed to patrol and battle on the high seas. Suddenly, without a comparable rival, the US was the world's single naval superpower, and its fleet needed to reflect this new order. Now the new preeminent worry was pirates, terrorists, and gunrunners zipping along coasts, requiring something nimble, fast, and flexible enough to keep pace in the in-between, the coastal waters, where threats were diverse and warfare often asymmetrical. To fill the void, Navy officials presented 2 ideas. The DD-21, a larger ship capable of holding its own on tight coastal waters, or what planners called the Street Fighter, a smaller, sleeker, and critically cheaper option. From the jump, these Street Fighters were more appealing. They'd require smaller crews, they'd be fast, capable of surprising enemies, they'd be stealthy, and with the advent of new hull technology, they'd be light enough to push 45 knots while still having ocean-wide range and carrying a payload. If that wasn't enough to future-proof such a concept, they'd be modular too, capable of switching weapon systems and kits to fit different missions, from surface combat to minesweeping. But still, by 2000, such a street fighter was just a concept. A concept that the Navy quickly turned over to private contractors after it proved too difficult to actualize in-house. Entering agreements with both General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin to each produce 2 ships in 2 separate models, the Navy handed the project off to the private sector, assuming the competition between the two for future LCS contracts would produce a 21st century mainstay. While the daunting scope had begun to add to the price tag, the Navy hoped these ships could come in relatively cheap by shipbuilding standards, somewhere between $150 to $225 million per unit. By 2009, the US had 2 ships, one from each contractor, but not 4, as budget overrun on both models was so extreme that the Navy canceled the contracts for the second of each. What was supposed to be in the $200 million at most had ballooned to about double the price. The issue was, however, the LCS remained a critical cog in the planned New Age Navy fleet, and they needed to buy a lot more than 2. 56 of them, in fact, or 82, or 63, or 55, or most recently 52, depending on their evolving ship force structure projections. But no matter how many, they needed a lot and needed them fast, as LCSs were expected to replace old minesweepers and outdated frigates. And rather than settling on a single class of LCS as previously planned to incentivize competition, they proposed Congress an alternative, what they called a dual award strategy, offering each company a 10-ship contract over the next 5 years. All the while, the problems with the Navy's current LCSs were already beginning to show. As a general rule in shipbuilding, a ship can have range, it can have speed, and it can have a heavy payload, but it can't have all 3 at once. With speed as a principal mandate, both General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin had to get creative and make sacrifices. While both classes are able to reach an incredible 44 knots, some 10 to 15 more than a typical Navy ship, they made separate design choices to get there. For the Independence class, this meant a unique aluminum trimaran hull. As for the Freedom class, while Lockheed Martin went with a more conventional steel monohull, it innovated on the drivetrain side, developing a complicated combining gear that connected the ship's diesel engines with its gas turbines. Both designs were innovative, but both had problems. Aluminum hulls, it turns out, are brittle, and at speeds of higher than just 15 knots or on rough seas, they may well crack. As for the combining gear, well, they were hard to keep running, as the components were buried so deep in the ship that maintenance staff could hardly reach them, and when they broke down, as they did early and often, they were so complicated that Navy personnel had to wait around for Lockheed engineers to diagnose the problem and come up with a solution. Then there was the issue of survivability. Built as a combat ship, the LCS was intended to reach Level 1 survivability, the ability to continue operations after an underwater explosive attack. In 2010, the same year it pushed for the congressional green light for 20 more of these ships, the Navy conceded that the ships already produced hadn't reached Level 1 survivability. And still, it got worse. In the rush to get these ships on the water, no time was taken to ensure that all the ship modules actually worked. When they did get to testing the modules, it turned out they didn't. The anti-submarine warfare module proved unreliable because the ship itself is so loud that the towed sonar can't reliably pick up any other noise. Similarly, the mine countermeasures mission package, which relies on onboard sensors and an unmanned influence sweep system, has been plagued with delays, breakdowns, and a penchant for causing false alarms. What was supposed to be an endlessly customizable ship, capable for surface combat, submarine hunting, and minesweeping, has effectively been rendered just a gunship that can't take a hit. Regardless of these varying limitations, as of 2023, the US Navy has purchased 30 LCSs. They've broken down at sea, they've bumped into walls of the Panama Canal, they've spent a winter stuck in an iced-over St. Lawrence River, they've run a handful of minor missions, and they've averaged about $500 million per ship to build. For a ship that was supposed to be the future, the littoral combat ship has proved nothing short of a disaster. A reality the Navy's finally begun to come to grips with by decommissioning or working towards decommissioning 9 of the vessels. The LCS, by all metrics, has failed to live up to its lofty billing. And it has failed publicly and expensively. But it's far from the only decades-long development project that's fallen on its face. Boeing Sikorsky won the contract to build the Comanche helicopter in 1991, but after a decade of work and $7 billion being poured into the project, only 2 prototypes ever actually left the ground. As for America's first stealth destroyer, the Zumwalt, its gun system has yet to prove the range it's promised, its missile system can't hit targets consistently, and its guided shells cost a prohibitive $800,000 per unit. With similarly high hopes as the LCS, the Zumwalt project was eventually cut after only 3 ships were built. Then, most famously, the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter, adaptable, future-forward, state-of-the-art, has seen one technical glitch and one busted budget after the next for 2 whole decades, its cost ballooning to 89% over what was initially predicted. And the list goes on with countless other smaller, multi-billion-dollar projects. To a certain extent, such mistakes and miscalculations make sense when working to invent the future of warfare. Expensive swings and misses are part of the development process. But it wasn't always this way, and increasingly, it seems the swings have gotten bigger and the misses more frequent. When the Department of Defense wants a ship or a plane or a weapon system built, there's a select group of 5 companies it typically turns to: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and General Dynamics. Excluding Boeing, all these companies earn the majority of their revenue from US or allied military contracts, which only happen with the approval of the US. But even excluding foreign defense revenue, 71% of Lockheed Martin revenue, for example, comes from the US government. That translates to $47.5 billion a year. Put another way, Lockheed Martin is given more by the US government each year than NASA, a major government agency. In fact, if the defense contractor was a government agency, it'd be the 24th largest. It gets more money from the US government than the majority of government agencies. But unlike agencies, thanks to this business, Lockheed Martin profits nearly $1 billion a month. But war wasn't always such a profitable venture. Technology was what brought the private sector to battle. Whereas in centuries past, militaries were primarily defined by human might, the advent of airplanes marked perhaps the biggest instance yet of a non-military technology that could be used to gain a militaristic advantage. During and after World War I, a number of fledgling aerospace companies gained modest contracts with the US military, contributing to annual overall production counts in the dozens or hundreds. But then came World War II. Suddenly, the US and its allies needed as many planes as they could get, and with that, the US government started awarding colossal contracts to anyone who could build an aircraft. Lockheed, Goodyear, McDonnell, Douglas, Boeing, Hughes, Grumman, Northrop, Vought, Convair, and more. While all these companies had existed in some form prior, the war was, for all intents and purposes, what established them. McDonnell, for example, went from 15 employees to 5,000. Hughes went from 4 to 80,000. As a sum, whereas in the 6 years leading up to the war, the US built a mere 20,000 aircraft, during it, the country's manufacturers produced a massive 300,000. But then the war ended, and this was bad for business. Aircraft manufacturers immediately struggled. Some shifted towards civilian aviation, others refocused on auto manufacturing, others still consolidated, while the US government searched for contracts that could be used to keep this new industrial sector, which played no small part in the Allied victory, afloat. Rather quickly though, a new conflict emerged: the Cold War. In its early days, rumors arose that the Soviet Union had produced an inconceivable quantity of long-range bombers. As the world had now entered the nuclear age, this massively concerned American media, the public, and ultimately Congress. It was believed that their newfound enemy could straight up eradicate the US. In response, Eisenhower ordered an immediate ramp-up of American bomber production and agreed to a Lockheed proposal to develop the U-2 high-altitude surveillance aircraft. It would fly over the Soviet Union undetected, at least theoretically, and get a definitive answer to just how formidable their bomber fleet had become. The answer was not much. It was a mere fraction of what had been speculated, but Lockheed and other manufacturers had already cashed their checks, so the answer meant little to them. A near-identical story emerged just a few years later with missiles. The Soviets had launched Sputnik, and the Democrats of the era used the event to propagate a narrative that Eisenhower and his Republican Party were falling behind Soviet technological development. John F. Kennedy, in the run-up to the 1960 presidential election, latched on to inflated estimates of Soviet missile capabilities leaked from the Air Force and started to make the perceived imbalance a central part of his campaign. He argued that his political foes were ignoring this threat, and the American public believed him. Even after having received definitive evidence to refute this fact, he continued the rhetoric. It was just so useful politically, which contributed to an acceleration of US missile development. This was a much-needed windfall for US aerospace companies given the waning need for high-volume aircraft development. It was this very incident, in fact, that precipitated the first use of the phrase military-industrial complex in Eisenhower's farewell address, where he warned of the phenomenon's danger. The subsequent escalation of the Cold War kept the defense industry alive and kicked off an era of growth as US military spending started to consistently increase, but then the wall came down. With no more Cold War, the DoD warned contractors of massive cutbacks in spending. This kicked off a feeding frenzy of consolidation and acquisition as the industry prepared to weather what they believed would be the first sustained period of peace in their existence. Defense spending did decrease, but only slightly and only for a moment. 9/11 and the ensuing wars quickly returned the US to the historical trend of near perpetual spending build, and today, with these wars largely wrapped up, the new most popular justification for military spending is growing Chinese military might. Now, many of these supposed threats may be legitimate, but it's tough to know with confidence because the defense industry, its lobbyists, and politicians are incredibly effective at shaping public discourse. In fact, the vast majority of the top think tanks are funded, at least in part, by defense contractors. These same think tanks are what are used by politicians and the media as supposedly expert justification for funding to counter new emerging threats. Ignoring for the moment the more unknowable question of whether warmongering for the sake of defense industry profits is effective in practice, it's undeniable that the incentive structures are certainly there. But perhaps the best evidence for this phenomena's influence is the fact that, inflation adjusted, today's military spending is approaching World War II levels despite no active US involvement in any major conflicts. Of course, one can still debate whether this level of spending is justified by the present geopolitical landscape, but what's undeniable is that taxpayers are getting less and less for their money. There was a time when defense spending had undeniably massive downstream effects. The US military was a major financial force behind the development of world-changing innovations like nuclear technology, GPS, and the internet. In fact, in the 1960s, a full third of the entire world's research and development funding came from US defense-related spending. But today, that share has shrunk to a mere 3%, and what was once perhaps the most innovative force in the world has become downright bad at it. The US auto industry, for example, has quickened its pace of development. It now gets a car to market faster. The US commercial aircraft industry has trended slightly slower, yet in the realm of military aircraft, something dramatic has occurred. What used to take 3 or 5 or 7 years now stretches into decades. A key part of the problem is that the government has taken the inefficiencies of the public sector and pushed them into the private sector where they can be profited upon. When developing a new generation of aircraft or ship or anything, the DoD sets strict parameters. That flips traditional incentive structures. Most industries see the private sector innovate in order to create new products that their customers will want. In this case, the customer tells the private sector exactly what they want, and this industry spends heavily on lobbyists, many of whom used to work for the DoD, in order to shape contracts towards what they can build with minimal risky research and development, therefore stifling innovation. But even then, the risk for the contractor is mitigated further because a big chunk of contracts are awarded on a cost-plus basis. That's to say, the government pays for what it costs to build a given technology, then the contractor gets a percentage on top of that as profit. This directly disincentivizes cost efficiency, as the more a project costs, the more the contractor makes. Of course, in normal industries, the contractor would still be incentivized towards efficiency in order to win the next contract, but in this industry, 2/3 of major weapons system contracts, for example, are bid upon by just one company, while yet more contracts are awarded without a competitive bidding process. Perhaps most egregiously, it's well understood that some contracts are awarded to struggling, ineffective companies simply because the US government does not want that company to go bankrupt and therefore for its manufacturing capabilities to be lost. This is perhaps one of the strongest justifications for the spending. The US military cannot afford for Lockheed or Boeing or Raytheon or the other contractors to go bankrupt because they are the only companies in the world capable of producing the technologies that bestow the fighting force with such a technological advantage. So, a situation has been crafted where these companies are too important to fail, and they know that. so they can profit off of their necessity rather than their effectiveness. The aforementioned only scratches the surface of the deep web of incentives that keeps the military-industrial complex alive, but at its core, it's as simple as this. It is good for politicians politically and good for contractors economically to create the perception of problems that simply do not exist. No one gets punished when a threat does not materialize. In fact, they can argue that their response, upon which they profited politically or economically, mitigated the threat. Meanwhile, individuals are punished when a threat they argued did not exist materializes, disincentivizing anyone from doing so. Fear is an incredibly powerful emotion, and at its core, the military-industrial complex has created an incredibly effective system to capitalize upon it. As you might have noticed, the last Wendover video is no longer on.
As you are watching this on our Facebook platform, you can as well go to our YouTube page or our YouTube channel at MFM TV. YouTube, you can watch it and drop your comment at the same time, and let's see what your reaction is. In the proposed 2024 budget, the Ministry of Defense has an allocation of about 78.5 billion naira for personnel and that of overhead cost. But the defense minister argued that the proposed allocation is not enough to fight insecurity facing the country due to the economic situation of the country. Do you know that in US, they proposed like $900 billion for their military, for their force? How much are we proposing? 78.5 billion naira. Well, it's clear the rate at which we are having insecurity, insurgency in Nigeria. Do you think 78.5 billion naira is enough for the 2024 budget? However, the Nigerian Navy, the naval force of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, which is a branch of the Nigeria Armed Forces, with 75 warships, including the 2 frigates, Thunder and that of Aradu, is categorized as the 5th strongest navy in Africa. The fifth strongest in Africa, after South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and that of Morocco. Then we have Nigeria. As I've said, these countries that I've mentioned earlier, South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and Morocco, what is the crime rate in all these countries? Someone said Nigerian military, Nigerian armed forces, they are not well taken care of. The research that I made by myself shows that if you join Nigerian Army with WAEC, which means something like SSE, you earn nothing less than 50,000 naira. 50,000 naira. with SSE. Actually, they have training allowance, special forces allowance, transport allowance, and that of operation allowance. The recruits who are under training, they are being paid about 12,000 naira to 15,000 naira. There are some called short service cadets under training are paid about 15,000 naira to 25,000 naira monthly, while regular cadets in the Nigerian Defense Academy are paid between 25,000 naira and 50,000 naira monthly, depending on the year of the cadet. Could this be one of the factors that determines insecurity in Nigeria? The video shown, as we've seen, the U.S. Army, they usually place infantry occupation to the front lines. We have Nigerians. We've traveled all over the world, and then we've seen many of these countries. Even though if you want to go on a tour, vacation, visiting, tourism, no matter what passport or whatever you have on your visa, it's worth noting that what are they doing well in this country that I am, that we are not doing better in Nigeria. When we talk about the top 10 African nations, with that of highest, with their military powers, actually we've not seen that of 2024, but as at towards late 2023, we still have Egypt, the first in Africa, and then 14th globally. Okay, if you are following my analysis, Egypt first in Africa and 14th in the global ranking. Algeria second in Africa, 26th in the global ranking. South Africa third in Africa and then 33rd in the global ranking. Nigeria sits at the 4th position in Africa and 36th in the global ranking. We have the likes of Ethiopia in 5th, 49th in global ranking. In Africa, Angola occupies 6th position, while 55th position globally. Morocco is in 7th position in Africa, 61st globally. Democratic Republic of Congo, 8th position, 72nd globally. Tunisia, 9th in Africa, 73rd globally. Sudan. Who could have believed Sudan would make it up to the top 10? In Africa, then 75th globally. Many did not know that Sudan political unrest is part of what that is affecting them in Sudan. Well, we have it like that in Nigeria. The question is this: what do you think contributes to insecurity in Nigeria? Are they not well taken care of? Or could they be power shifting from the north to the south? I don't want to say more than that. Or could it be there is a bigwig politician that is affecting Nigeria? Or there are bigwig politicians, no matter what happens to someone will definitely benefit from it. I want us to know that one. With all these that we have in Nigeria, more than 200 million population. In fact, if they ask you to come and join the military, will you willingly say you want to join with a force of more than 223,000 active personnel? To me, it's very low. And yet, the Nigerian military is one of the largest uniformed combat services in Africa. Well, to me, 223,000 active personnel is low for over 200 million population. Why not having like 500,000 active personnel? Let's take care of them very well. Let's get things straight. The way we are having insurgency, kidnapping, banditry, terrorism, ritualism in Nigeria, we did not have it in DR Congo. We did not have it in Tunisia. We did not see similar things in Morocco. We did not have similar things in Angola, even Ethiopia, and all these countries. They are far, far behind Nigeria, both in Africa and globally. So definitely, as I do say, if you pray, because I know we like prayer in Nigeria, saying God should arrest the man that is disturbing the peace of Nigeria. Well, actions needed to be taken by the federal government of Nigeria as well. Dele Alake said something like 2-3 days ago, saying if he should open his mouth to mention names of Nigerians that are disturbing the oil sector, we will be amazed. Like 2 days ago as well, he came out, he said he has been receiving threat messages saying, don't mention any names. And this is Nigeria that we are praying for, day in, day out. I will stop here today. Burning issues will return next Thursday by the special grace of God. Let me see what we have on our Facebook page. As we have many of those messages on our Facebook platform, I sincerely appreciate everyone. Olusola, I'm fine. Only that, when it comes to Nigeria, if you are a lover of Nigeria, it's alarming. Nigeria is a place for us to live. It's a place for us to enjoy. Adio Solomon saying forces are being paid, paying not. And then Aderinto Yanulua saying the government are trying for the forces, military, and all. And many of those messages like that. Many thanks to everyone who worked with me this very afternoon. Larry is the man behind the engine, doing that fantastic job. Till next Thursday, that burning issue will come your way again. Olusola Ayobami is my name.
Gentle Boy, the youngest producer.